Have you ever listened to a piece of music and felt like you were looking at a painting? Not a story, but an actual image, like sunlight on water or a foggy morning? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today, a musical revolution that completely changed how we hear everything. So, can music really paint a picture? And I don't mean tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. I'm talking about creating an atmosphere, a mood, a visual impression, just with sound. Well, back at the end of the 19th century, in the bustling, artistic hotbed of Paris, a group of composers decided to give it a shot. They were just fed up with the old ways and wanted to create something totally new, something that felt like the hazy, beautiful paintings their artist friends were making. Okay, so to really get how revolutionary this was, we gotta look at what they were rebelling against. Because these composers weren't just writing pretty tunes, they were tearing up the entire rulebook. So check out this contrast. On one side, you have the old school, think German Romanticism. It was all about heavy drama and super strict rules. But the Impressionists? Nope. They wanted to capture fleeting moments. Instead of rigid structures, their main rule was just feeling. And they traded in those clear, hummable melodies for something they called sound colors. Think of it like this. Instead of a single melody line you can sing, they used combinations of instruments to create rich textures, just like a painter mixing colors on a palette. So what did this new music actually sound like? Well, imagine taking a photograph and just blurring the edges a little bit so it feels more like a dream than sharp reality. That's the exact sound they were going for. And this quote right here just nails it. The composers, especially on the piano, would use the pedals to let the notes just bleed into one another. There were no hard stops, just this continuous flow of sound, exactly like watercolors running together on wet paper. And this unique sound was built from a very specific palette. We're talking shimmering, foggy textures. The rhythm wasn't some steady beat you could tap your foot to. It was fluid, like water. The music was often super quiet, using instruments like harps and flutes to create this magical, airy quality. The whole point was to remove any hard edges and create a mysterious sense of wonder. But look, this dreamy sound wasn't just random magic. These composers were like musical chemists, using brand new ingredients and formulas to get these effects. So let's take a peek inside their toolbox. One of their favorite tools was the whole tone scale. Now, unlike the major and minor scales you might be used to, this one doesn't have a clear home bass note. It just seems to float endlessly, which is why it sounds so unresolved and dreamlike. They also borrowed the pentatonic scale. This is a 5-note scale you find in folk music all over the world, from Asia to Africa, and it gave their music this fresh, kind of exotic flavor that audiences in Paris had really never heard before in a concert hall. And this is a huge shift in thinking. Before this, chords were functional. Their job was to build tension and then resolve it. But the Impressionists started using chords like a painter uses dabs of color. They didn't care about the rules. If a chord sounded beautiful and created the right color, they used it, period. All right, so leading this rebellion were 2 French composers who became the absolute masters of this new style, even though they had very different personalities. So let's meet the geniuses behind the sound, Claude Debussy and Maurice Ravel. First up, Claude Debussy. He's often called the father of musical impressionism. He was the guy who really broke away from his teachers at the conservatory and decided to just follow his own ears. And this quote pretty much sums up his entire philosophy. Debussy believed that if it sounds good, it is good. He wasn't interested in academic exercises. He was interested in creating beauty and pleasure for the listener. Debussy found his inspiration all over the place. In nature, he wrote music about clouds, the wind, reflections, and water. He was an absolute magician on the piano, creating pieces like the incredibly famous Clair de Lune. And a key moment for him was the 1889 World's Fair in Paris, where he heard a gamelan orchestra from Java. That metallic, shimmering sound totally changed how he thought about music. The other great master was Maurice Ravel. Now, if Debussy was the dreamy pioneer, Ravel was the brilliant, meticulous craftsman, a total perfectionist. Ravel was a genius at orchestration. That's the art of combining different instruments to create new sound colors. Unlike Debussy, he was fascinated by the precision of things like mechanical toys and clocks. You can kind of hear that in his most famous piece, Bolero, which is this one long, hypnotic tune that just builds and builds. He also brought a lot of Spanish rhythms into his music, which gave it a more defined, dance-like energy.
Okay, so this was all over 100 years ago. Why should we care now? Well, because the ideas these rebels came up with are absolutely everywhere in the music we listen to today.
Just take a look at this timeline. The complex, colorful chords of Impressionism directly influenced early jazz musicians. The focus on creating atmosphere and mood became like the blueprint for modern film scores. And you can find those dreamy soundscapes all over the place, in ambient music and even in pop songs today. So, when you boil it all down, the biggest legacy of Impressionism wasn't just a handful of pretty pieces. It was a whole new way of thinking about what music could be. It opened the door for composers to put personal expression, feeling, and the pure beauty of sound front and center. Which brings us to one last thought. Next time you're watching a movie, especially a fantasy film or maybe a nature documentary, really listen to the score. In which soundtracks can you hear the echoes of Debussy and Ravel's Rebellion? The answer? Well, it might just surprise you.